The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity.
All right. Well, Barry, I forgot what I was going to say. Why don't you kick us off?
Well, today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, we are going to be addressing a very, very important issue that has to do with quality of life. Certainly something that is often challenging for families with their family members, and that has to do with supporting physical health. We have two wonderful guests that I'd like to welcome right now, Belden Long and Kara Wilkinson. So welcome to Uniquely Human, the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, hello, everybody.
Just a little bit about their backgrounds. You might be familiar with Belden. We had her on previously about some of the important work that she's doing, and that this is additional important work. Belden Long has just completed her doctorate in occupational therapy at Duke University in the medical school and is passionately pursuing projects that support physical health and wellness through yoga, mindfulness, and exercise. And there will be links to some of her information and also some of her activities on the page that we affiliate with this particular podcast. Kara Wilkinson is a life skills instructor at Community Autism Resources, and Community Autism Resources is a Massachusetts family support center that assists and educates families and professionals to better meet the needs of autistic individuals, both children and adults, and their families. She is also the mother of two teenage boys who are autistic, and she is autistic herself. So let's dive right in, and I want to begin by saying, it has been my pleasure, actually, to work with Belden and now with Kara on a project that really was a capstone project for Belden at Duke University. And I had the great privilege to support and be involved peripherally in this project with Belden. So I'm so excited that both of you have the opportunity to share the project and your experiences. So let's start with your own personal experiences. And in Belden's case, her training as an occupational therapist. What has made physical health and well-being such an important focus in each of your lives, and in the case of Kara, our family's life, and the work that you do? So why don't we start with Kara?
Thanks. My experience is actually kind of personal. I was always a bigger person, but very active. I was always on the run, like I was run by a motor, which now I know why. So I'm recently diagnosed as autistic and having ADHD. But a few years ago, after I had my last son, all of a sudden it all stopped. And I got very sick, and my hair was falling out, and I felt like I couldn't move, and my heart was always racing. And it took a while to figure it out, but I had thyroid cancer. And it had actually affected my heart and other areas of my body. And it took 8 months and several surgeries for me to get better. And for them to say, you're healthy now. But it didn't feel like I was healthy. All I could think was that year and all that time where I couldn't move and I couldn't get on the floor with my kids and play with my kids. And I had really felt like I was dying and I wasn't going to get to see my kids grow up. So once they said I was better, and even before then, I decided to focus on trying to make my body last as long as possible and to have the kind of life I wanted, to be able to move like I wanted to and play with my kids like I wanted to and have the freedom to do all these things I missed. And I saw my kids and I wanted them to have the same thing. I didn't want them to be held back, and I want them to have long and healthy lives. And that's made me focus in this area.
Boy, you talk about a profound wake-up call to all of a sudden focus and even defining what feeling good means with the co-occurring conditions you experienced. Wow.
Right.
Belden.
I appreciate how Kara articulated her experience. And I think that in my own way, understanding the profound impact that movement can have and that it can be a mechanism to health and well-being. And so I think as an athlete growing up, so many of my family's experiences revolved around sport and play, and so many of my friendships, and it afforded me so many opportunities. But then I went to OT school, and a whole nother layer of physical activity and the benefits of it opened up. And I saw it more as a way to continue doing the things that you want and need to do in your everyday life. And even more than that, it being a way to ground and calm your central nervous system so that you can show up meaningfully in the rest of your life. So for me, it really became something where I used physical activity so that I could go sit for a long lecture and really be present. I used physical activity to help calm me. I used it as a way to socialize with my friends. And I think that it being something that prepares people to learn and also to be available for social interaction, I was really fascinated about, and a way to help others do it with the least resistance. So not just to do it as a chore, but really as a way to have fun and it's meaningful to them.
Brilliant.
You know, both of your comments, of course, just illustrates that even if we're talking about physical wellness and physical health, the impact on mental health and quality of life is profound. And both of you, through your individual journeys and paths, have discovered that either both for yourselves, but now also for helping other people as well. So there's so much information that you have gleaned from the work you've been doing. And the name of the project is Exploring the Importance of Physical Wellness Activities with Autistic People. So let's talk a little bit about the motivation for engaging in the project. And I know it began with Belden and her idea, but then Kara became a very important partner in the project. So just, if you would, kind of help our listeners understand what your goals were for the project, the methodology, what kind of information you gathered, and from whom you gathered this information. So maybe we should start with Belden, since this was an idea that kind of she birthed, and then Kara's, unbelievable kind of collaborative efforts to really enhance the project.
Yeah, so I'll start with the main idea of the project was to really understand the autistic voice and perspective. And I'm not neurodivergent. I'm also not a mom yet. And really exploring, what does physical activity mean and what are the barriers and what's meaningful to autistic people? And everybody's different, but at least starting to really understand, like, if I'm going to build programs and I'm going to try to support physical activity, well, what do people want?
Almost like a
needs-based assessment. How can we create programs that are informed and amplify the autistic voice? And so that was the main goal, was I wanted to understand and amplify the autistic person's experiences, particularly in community-based physical activity services. And then I wanted to look at meaningful movement across the lifespan. I think that a lot of times we focus on programs for youth, but then what happens when an autistic adult still wants to support, engage in physical activity? and using all of this to inform efforts to promote physical health with autistic individuals. So those were the motivating aspects of the project. And so I conducted a literature review, and then I did an online questionnaire. And again, the main focus was doing this all with autistic people. And that was one of the best parts about it. And that's where I think working with Carol was so helpful. She got a group of moms together. They looked at the survey, and they had points they really liked and points that kind of rubbed them the wrong way. And that was great to hear. It's everybody reads things differently, and it comes to looks at a questionnaire and has their own lens and experiences. So did the online questionnaire, then conducted semi-structured interviews with autistic individuals, and then also family members of autistic people. And we had over 20 autistic individuals complete the survey, and 40 family members of autistic individuals. And then in addition to that, we had over 10 semi-structured interviews. I did a thematic analysis of all of the data, created a code book, did a mini results, did a mini discussion, a perspectives piece, and then really created a guidebook based on all of that information that I thought could take what I had learned and give practical strategies and highlight some of the stories of and voices of people's experiences engaging in physical activity.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just interject before we have Kara's perspective on this, it almost goes without saying that people who work in supporting autistic individuals or individuals with disabilities, we know that such observable challenges may include being overweight, obesity. We see this every day, and we see people struggling in their lives with that. But so often the recommendation is, well, get them out and have them do more physical activity. And obviously what your study is about is looking at, is that really that easy? It's just, that's what you do. So Kara, with your experience, not only with your family, but with, Community Autism Resources serves thousands of families in Southeast Massachusetts. How do you view that need and those kinds of challenges, and based upon your personal experiences?
That was one of the things that Belden and I really connected on at first, because there are all different people, and we definitely see that here at CAR in Southeastern Massachusetts. We have parents of young children, middle school to high school age, and then we have adults. We have family members that are trying to be the advocates for their children who they might not be able to necessarily communicate with. We have people with profound autism and people who might not need as much support. Someone like myself or one of my sons who you may not necessarily know unless we let you in on some of the struggles that we have. But all of us are affected in different ways, and we all care about each other. Parents love their kids and want to help their kids be healthy. And autistic individuals want to have full lives.
Yes.
However, it's not always necessarily available to us. And sometimes we have so many roadblocks, it's just easier to not try. So I really wanted to see if we could get as many people with as many different viewpoints as possible from the different areas, which is why I had the different moms that work here. Some have young kids that have just diagnosed at 3 or 5. Some have adult children who are my age. That they are living with them and have profound autism. And I wanted to see from the different areas of their life, at different times in their life, what is affecting them, what is stopping them from being able to reach this goal. And one of the more interesting things, I know Belden's going to talk into this more, is the continuity through all the different areas and all the different levels that we tried to look at, all the things that followed through. I thought it was very interesting.
So if we could start digging in with some more specific examples. And I'm going to continue with Kara for a moment. What do you hear from families? And then Belden, what did you find in the research about the barriers that individuals and families encounter when they, even with the best intention and the greatest motivation, we're talking about families who really want to improve quality of life for their family members, but they then find that the desire and the motivation can't be fulfilled because of barriers that they face in the community. So what are some of the issues that have come up?
I think a lot of the times we focus on people's social, emotional, or communication needs. And that happens in the schools or in different programs or places that we go to, and physical wellness gets put on the back burner as if it's not as important. So then when we try to go to areas for physical fitness or for wellness, they may not have as much experience working with people who are neurodivergent at all. And may have certain expectations we may not be able to meet, or we may be afraid we might not be able to meet. Also for parents, I find there's still that area where you worry that it will be difficult for your children, or your children won't fit in, and what will people think of them? And that's a barrier. It's a anxiety-based barrier, but it's well-founded because it happens, and it happens often. There's also times I've personally had this where places have turned us down. Swim lessons have turned us down because they do not support people with autism. Different groups or clubs that we try to do. And I know my husband has brought this up. You worry, you want your kids to be able to go and play sports and have fun with other kids, but if it's not supported and if they don't have staff to help them, it's not like at school where you have support. Your kids can miss out on that opportunity. And it doesn't mean that they couldn't play or they wouldn't be able to play a part, but without the supports available, they don't have a chance, or it becomes too stressful. And then it's, why are you going to put your child through that? There are a lot of different barriers that can happen in everyday life that people don't, I think about. Whereas
I mean, what you're sharing is so profound, because if you think of it, most parents, or if it's a parent of so-called neurotypical child, you look forward to seeking out that baseball team or that hockey team. And you look forward to connecting your child for their joy and also for your joy as a parent. And what you're describing is, for so many family members and parents who happen to have an autistic child, it's a risk. It's like, oh my God, is this going to cause more stress and anxiety due to the way that people treat us or respond to our request? So Belden, I'm just curious about, what came out of some of your interviews and what you heard directly in addition to what Kara has said.
Well, I think that was Kara. I mean, that echoed the voice. That was that was it. That was what the survey said. And what was great about the survey is there was a lot of space. Excuse me. Sorry. What was great about the survey was there was a lot of space for open-ended responses. And it seemed like majority of people were willing to share and gave a lot of quotes. So I just wanted to highlight a few. And a lot of it was around difficulty locating physical activity opportunities that were a good fit. And I think what we all know is that every person with autism is so different. And a lot of times, people were saying some services won't take him if he is, others won't take him if he's not. And we need to focus on what he can and cannot do and stop labels. I think all levels of autism have difficulties. And another person was saying that, particularly there's difficult for level 1 individuals. You're feeling autistic enough not to fit in with mainstream sports, but not autistic enough to fit in with special needs. And they even said, I apologize for the ableist language here. It's hard to summarize his frustration in other terms. And I think that there was an overwhelming response that the services, the coaches and the leaders weren't patient or understanding, and not to their own fault, but it seemed like they didn't know how and didn't understand necessarily what autism is and how that might translate into a child's or a person's participation in that activity. And so that was a big response. And one, there was other ones where it was they mentioned that the symptom of autism impacts their participation and engagement, including their ways of moving, their learning or paying attention. and then just accessibility and finances. And I thought that was particularly interesting, where we had some autistic adults saying things like, I love playing dodgeball, but I can't find places to play.
Mhm.
Or my son loves horseback riding, and I wish we could afford it more, but we can only go once a week. And so even when family members or families had found a good fit, the level or the temporal engagement that they could do it in was limited. Surfing, that's seasonal. And so that's, I think, really thinking about how we create sustainable programs that support consistent engagement in these activities is also a thing to think about for families.
Yeah, and another big issue, of course, is kind of the social context of the activities. Are we talking about activities that demands understanding of complex social rules of a game of soccer or a game of baseball? And of course, we do know that there are adapted sports now with more simplified rules and more active participation. But I think this notion of, oh, this child or this person is autistic, and therefore we just can't do it because he or she is autistic. I mean, I point to a wonderful family. Mom's name is Mary Kay, who's come to our parent retreat for decades. And she has twin sons who are now, I believe, close to 30, who would be considered, very, very impacted on a number of levels by not just their autism, but other aspects of their disability. And they are now, I mean, hiking some of the greatest peaks in the United States. And they have profoundly changed activities in the family. And I think, I forget what it is specifically. I should have looked this up. I apologize. But in New England, there's a number of treks where you build up to like 75 of the peaks in the New England mountains, and they've done close to all of them now. But the point is that so often just the fact that a child has a diagnosis, some people will think, well, we can't do that. Yet we have seen in so many different ways. And now in terms of physical health, autistic people saying we prove them wrong again. If you give us the opportunity with the right support, it can happen. And it really can be successful.
Another thing I'd like to add to that is another concern that people don't realize is, what if the thing we try first isn't the right one for us? What if it's too loud or sensory-wise it's not appropriate for us? Then we have to try different things to find the right fit for us. And by then we're exhausted. Like you said, the social rules, the finding out what works. Is this just going to be the same thing? It's a very big mountain to climb to find that. So on top of all the other concerns, it just adds another level.
Yeah, and that if there are situations that have not been helpful or even stressful, then the risk factor goes up. Because not only do autistic individuals have very strong memories, but parents have very strong memories of what has worked and what doesn't work. And therefore that can become a barrier, because nobody wants to seek out something you think should be helpful, but in the end just causes more challenge and more stress. And like so many things that happen with all individuals with different labeled disabilities, it's often the limitations and the barriers and the attitudinal issues that are the barriers. It's not necessarily the capability of the person with the right supports, or the family that has, if you will, the right people behind them, advocating for them and with them. And that's really important. So let's shift a little bit to, what I guess is one of the most important goals of the project. And that is what families can do. That it's not necessarily all about organized physical activities or activities that other people are kind of bringing to the table. So what kind of suggestions not only have you come out of, Kara, for your family's life, and Belden from your personal experiences, but also what some of the people you interviewed have shared about moving us on the road more towards solutions and things that can be done to support physical health. So Belden, why don't we go with you on this?
So I was actually, when you guys were talking earlier, my brain was going, oh, don't, got really excited because again, I think it's all about focusing on what we can do. And first, I love what Kara said about it might look different. So, and just always staying hopeful. And it's easier said than done. But I will say there was so many families and autistic adults that expressed that they had found joy in movement. And I think particularly earlier, Carrie, you were sharing about feeling anxious about going somewhere and the unpredictability and the novelty. And I noticed that several autistic individuals had found success in experiences where there were less social demands. So things like running groups, biking groups, Zumba classes, where there was an opportunity to feel a part of the group, but there was also an individual component to it. And so I think that's something to think about as when you look at activities for your children to get involved in. Swimming is also a great option because it gives you constant proprioceptive feedback. So the water helps kids that might have challenges with body awareness, and then it's also supportive of your joints. So swimming is a great sport, and then jumping on a trampoline, those rhythmic activities that you're getting feedback can be particularly helpful. And I will say also, a big part of the project was thinking about informal exercise. And this is where I'm super excited for Kara to share her own experiences with her family. But we have this idea of exercise and organized sport. Oh, it's got to be 45 minutes. It's at 4 o'clock. I'm going to go run on the treadmill. It's got to be at a gym. I'm going to soccer practice. Really, let's demyth that and let's rethink what is movement and what is the meaning behind it. So Kara and I spent a lot of time talking about the difference between this being a chore and families feeling like this is something they have to do versus something that is meaningful. Gardening. Your body doesn't know the difference between pulling a weed and lifting a kettlebell. There's other things, there's practical things that we can all do in our everyday life that can support physical health that don't require carving out time and it being exercise. So I'm excited to shift the conversation about that because that is what I believe is necessary for longevity, sustainability, and then really an opportunity for for all of us, and especially the autistic community, to think about these things, to live a healthier life and to improve quality of life.
So I try to incorporate this in a lot of different ways. My poor kids, if they hear this, they're going to catch on to some of the things I do. But I'll start actually first with the Gotshall Access program where I'm a life skills instructor. One of the things we talk about is self-awareness and self-care and coping skills. And I always add in movement as part of that. And I explain when you move, we release endorphins. We can get those feel-good hormones going. It can help us with stress. It can help us cope. And with self-care, if we add little things in throughout the day, that helps make our bucket not get too big and too overwhelming. Because I found if they can understand the reasoning behind it, what they get from it, and not see it as a chore, something they get to do for them, they end up doing it more often.
What is the?
And I found that because
what is the Gotshall Access program? Can you explain that?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I should have done that.
No problem.
It's a college-based program that we do in southeastern Massachusetts for autistic adults. And we teach courses on a college campus. They get to go around the campus. They are members of the campus and can use all of the resources that they have available there.
Cool.
A lot of our students end up going to school there or to another program or a different school. We do career readiness, life skills, where they'll learn everything from self-awareness and determination, work skills, executive functioning, and we work on resumes and interviews. We do health and fitness. We do public speaking, and we do fun things too, singing, drama. We had 3D printing, crafting, music appreciation, things that our students want to learn about, and they're in the college campus. And we're really trying to get them to that next level once services at school end at 22.
Mhm. So, and that's Bristol County Community College, correct?
Yeah, Bristol Community College up in Fall River, Massachusetts.
Okay. And you build in the physical activities as an essential part of the program. Yeah.
Absolutely. We do have health and fitness class, but in the other classes, we add it in too. In our drama classes, we move our bodies to be more open. In self-awareness, it's coping skills and self-care. It's just added in throughout the time and as a valuable resource.
Yes.
And I took that and saw my kids who, it might be pathological demand avoidance, but if I say, hey, we have to, they're automatically like, no, not doing it. I'm done. So I found ways to just make it a part of our life. Like we have a dog. Our dog has to go for a walk. Let's the whole family take the dog for a walk. Oh, Teddy needs to play. Let's all go out and play. And it's about taking care of the dog, but they're getting it too. And then they're saying, well, if the dog needs to go for a walk, if we don't want the dog to have that many treats, it just naturally falls in. We have other routines, like if there's one floor, we take the stairs. So now if they don't feel up to it, they're like, can we take the elevator this time? But gardening was another example. It's something me and my 6-year-old do. We've built a garden this year, and it's something we do together. It's fun time for me and him, but he's getting activity. We're bending, we're pulling, we're planting. One of my boys were working on road safety because that is a challenge for us. And instead, that's me and his time to go and walk to the corner store where he gets a soda, because that's a fun time to have a soda. Why not? But it's him and my time, and it's our together time. But we're also working on, moving our bodies and him learning safety.
If I could interject, I'm just thinking about the perspective of parents, and you're talking about things that often happen every day or could happen every day. And one of the greatest stresses, as you know, is, am I doing enough for my kids? But so often, I think parents don't think of activities that you're talking about as part of, yes, I am doing something important. Just that sense from a parental perspective of, it doesn't have to be signing up at the Y for some classes, that I am doing important things that support my son or daughter's physical health in everyday activities, and bringing it to that conscious level of talking about it that way.
We've also done some out of the box things. Like in August, we do Active August, where my whole family competes against each other.
Oh, goodness.
So we have a list of activities that you can do and you can get points. And the person who gets the most points at the end of the week gets to pick a prize, usually the movie we'll watch that weekend. Wow. And then at the end of the month, the person who has the most points in total gets a bigger prize. We're still trying to decide the prize this year. But especially my 2 older boys, they started competing with each other, and they started going out more on their scooters, spending more time outside, wanting to do things in the lawn, like weeding, which they would never want to do. So I'm like, okay, and it builds that competition atmosphere, but then that would become more incorporated in their life, and they're still doing it. And it builds good habits that seem to stick with them, even when the competition ends.
What you just said was actually on the tip of my tongue. And that is, I think any person, if they know what they're doing, helps them feel more alert and physically just better in their body, it's something you want to seek out more. But if you don't have those opportunities, then you don't know what that feeling is like, whether it's taking a walk or whether it's going swimming or whatever it might be. We'd like to take a moment to thank you for listening to Uniquely Human, the podcast. It is so gratifying to hear that so many of you find value in what we share.
It is gratifying, and it's so much fun making this show together, Barry. Being able to meet with you every week and all the guests and listener support that we've received, it's such a joy to make this show. And of course, we are commercial free, But Barry and I would invite you to support this show in a number of different ways. That could be buying our books, or even inviting us to speak live or virtually to your organization or to your community.
Mm-hmm.
To learn more about all of this, you can, of course, go to our websites, barrypresant.com or davidjfinch.com, to learn more about our speaking topics and how to work with us and all of the consultative services that we provide.
And we also want to know how we're doing. We are in a constant quality improvement mode here.
Yes.
So please make sure to leave comments and ratings, suggestions on social media. Contact us directly on the links on our website, and recommend Uniquely Human, the podcast, to those in your lives. In conclusion, we are so grateful to you, our Uniquely Human community, for your support and loyalty, and we'll be keeping at it.
Yes, thank you all so much. Now back to the show.
So I'm curious, from some of your findings and some of your interviews, did you come up with any discussions about what does work in seeking out community support? So you gave some wonderful examples, Kara, of incredibly innovative activities within the family. But, we're not saying give up on the possibility of kind of community activities or community supports. So have you run across, or was it reported to you in this project about community environments or organizations that were more open and more supportive of physical wellness and health?
So I'm gonna jump in here.
Yes.
So I've actually, thankfully, families have opened up and been very generous and let me observe some of their experiences participating in community-based physical activity. So for example, I joined a little kiddo and his family at a rock climbing center.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to touch on some of the successful aspects of it that enabled this child to participate in a way that worked for him. And I think one of the things that Kara and I keeps mentioning, and Barry, you do so beautifully, is meeting kids where they're at. And I think that is the first thing that I notice with a successful interaction in a physical space, is meeting the kid where they're at. And then within that, it was great because in this family had established a very predictable routine. Saturday mornings, we're going to the rock climbing gym. The expectations were very clear.
Mm-hmm.
I free climb. I move to this part of the gym, and then we go and we go to the play area, and then we have a snack, and then we leave. And so within that, the expectations were clear. The staff was also flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that having a staff that is patient and even just watching staff interact, where you can see some people wanting to teach and coach. And I even used to be like that. I was watching videos of my interactions with autistic kids, and you almost don't want to watch them because I'm like, oh my, I am like sensory overload. And so seeing the minimal use of words and the patient, there's a latency between giving a coaching demand or encouraging, and then letting the child process and respond and move in a way that works for them. So I think having that in a staff, you can identify professionals or coaches, and there's even intuitive young adults that are at these rock climbing centers that just get it. There's those special people that work well with kids and see the kids and treat them, for who they are. So again, the expectations were clear. The staff was flexible. The family was super active in knowing what their kid needed, and they were definitely hands-on. So I think that's a huge piece of it. And then the child was, again, able to be around others, and the opportunity existed where they could play with a peer, they could onlook to a peer, they could, climb next to a peer, but it wasn't forced. There was no your turn, my turn, no, we need to pass, the ball back and forwards, waiting in line. And I think especially minimizing those initially, I think is helpful. And similarly, I've been to another family, different kids went to fencing, and that was another beautiful interaction. The instructor was clear and patient. It was a small group. And particularly in this setting, the visual cues and the boundaries of where to stand, I think, made a huge difference for this child. So he knew where his body needed to be at all times. So again, I think it's about finding instructors that, and I don't think they necessarily need to be trained in autism, but they have a sixth sense for dealing, for working with people, for understanding people. So I think those were keys. And the kids were intrinsically motivated to go. It was something that, it wasn't, again, a chore that they needed to go. It was something that they wanted to do.
So you're talking about the it factor in practice.
It is. It's
Some
the
people
it
who got
factor.
it.
It's the it factor, and I think when families find it, you can see their shoulders, and it's something to celebrate. And I think that what's so neat about this work is expanding people's vision of possibilities and educating. That's a huge piece, and that's what's so great about this podcast and about everybody's work here is that I think that's the space we need to get in, is just understanding how to be more inclusive with all humans and particularly people with autism. Yeah.
So some of the more general supports that we all know about, the predictability, and also inherent in what you said is reading the signals that child or person is giving us as to whether, okay, this is within, the fancy term is the zone of proximal development, that we are doing something that might be a little bit challenging, but with the right supports, this individual can feel competent and feel confident in learning how to do that, as opposed to, the pushback, this is well beyond me, or I'm not understanding what you're asking me to do, or the environment is so sensorily oppressive that I can't even focus on, what the activity is at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just gonna add, Barry, one more thing too, is I think also thinking about what you can control within an environment. So again, thinking about things with feedback. So a rock climbing gym, it's not going to change. You go in, the rocks are in the same places. This child had patterns of where he climbed, and that was supportive because he knew what to expect going in there. And I think similarly with fencing, you're holding something, it's giving you that feedback. So from an OT perspective, it's giving, you have something to hold, there's boundaries. It's that those are supportive features within the activity versus I think of like soccer, which for some kids that might be great and at some times, but I think there's less controllable factors. And then deal with a bunch of kids, weather, noise. And from personal experiences, I took one of the students I was working with to a UCLA soccer camp. I was so excited and I remember it was hard. It was really, really, the child was running, eloping around, like they didn't understand the rules, all these kids, there were too many people yelling. It was sensory overload. And in hindsight, I would have thought about the environment so much more I did not set him up for success. So I think really thinking about what the activity is going to look like. There are activities that are more supportive innately.
Yeah. And whether it's so important trying to take that individual or the child's perspective. Is this chaos to me?
Yeah.
Is this something that I could just watch and understand? Which ultimately leads to a sense of confidence that I could do this, as opposed to you're asking me to do something that's going to just cause more difficulty and stress for me. These are really, really great suggestions, both within the family as well as in the community. So why don't we talk a little bit about some takeaways that we can offer to our listeners? And our listeners include family members, autistic people, full range of so many different people in our community. So Carol, would you like to share your wisdom on this?
Yes. A lot of what Belden said, honestly, is really my motivation, is meet people where they are and believe where they are, and then help them from there with what they want help with. One thing Belden and I talked a lot about is our bodies are like vehicles. I always tell my kids and my students, your vehicle's like a car. You know, you got to take care of it. You got to put good stuff into it and you got to move it. Because if you don't move your car, it's going to stop moving.
Hmm.
Right? And looking at it from that mentality, and the same thing for families too. It doesn't have to be a big organized thing the way you always thought it had to be. It could be small little changes that you make a little bit at a time that will grow and expand upon each other. So eventually you're having more meaningful movement throughout the day and you'll enjoy it more. And that might lead you to try some more of these community-based things and
Hmm.
finding community-based things with people who are welcoming and neurodiversity affirming and that you feel comfortable with. It can become a part of your life. You just don't have to do it, jump right in right away. Remember,
Hmm.
every little bit helps. It will grow upon it. It will make you feel better. It'll make you feel healthier. It'll be healthier for your family, for your kids. And it really is a bonding experience. You know, I also use it a lot to teach my children things. So one other thing that I would say for any of my fellow parents out there who might have problems out in the supermarket, which I've had, one thing I like to do is make my kids be the student driver and they're pushing the cart and I'm pulling it along and they're getting some activity and we're
Hmm.
learning how to be there. And it's out in the community. All of these things will add more to our lives and it's helpful. I also understand it as an autistic individual. It can be scary, it can be hard, but it's worth it. It's
Yes.
worth it to keep trying. If you don't find something yet, keep adding these small little things at home until you find the next thing that's good for you. I never thought that I would love Zumba, but I do. I never thought that would be my thing, but I'll even do it at home, you know. Just
That's
keep
great.
trying.
You know, something also inherent in what you said, that I actually give some examples, and I'll think of one, from my book, Uniquely Human, of connecting an enthusiasm or an interest to
Mhm.
physical activity. So you mentioned like going to the supermarket and driving a car
Yeah.
through the supermarket. I give an example of a youngster in a classroom who didn't really want to join some of the morning stretches and exercises, but he absolutely was hyper focused on the presidents of the United States and certain things about their lives. So a stretching exercise, then became pretending to shoot hoops like President Obama was a basketball player. Um, or chopping down a tree like George Washington chopping down a cherry tree. And the exercise class, and very often with this young man, I think he was about 12 years of age, would be suggestions of what presidents like to do and how that could be transformed into part of the morning stretching and exercise in the classroom. I'm not saying it's that easy or it's going to work all the time, but we are motivated sometimes by things we already think about a lot and are really motivated to continue to do. And sometimes we could make those links. So Belden, your takeaways.
Well, and yeah, and I was gonna say, Kara, you had mentioned something the other day that didn't work for you, and I also agreed. And it was this idea of stacking, where you do something you don't like, and then you do something you do like right afterwards. And Kara, I don't know if you want to say, do you want to touch on why that doesn't work for you?
Yeah, I tried this. I've read this in several books, and it was like, okay, so work out, and then you can read a chapter of your book, or you can listen to the book while you're working out, or then you can watch a TV show. Me, the way my brain works, it does. I'm sitting here going, I don't have to work out. I can just put on the TV show. I can just listen to my book. Why are those connected? So eventually, it worked maybe one or two times, and then I was like, it doesn't work with my brain.
That's right.
It doesn't make sense to me. So I had to, even though that might be a habit that works for a lot of people, it did not, as long as it doesn't compute in my head, it's not going to work for me. And that's something I find, especially with my children and my family, some of those techniques people say to do, like go for a run and then reward yourself. I'm still going for a run. I'm still doing a chore. I'm still not happy about it. And then the minute I get
Exactly.
out of that habit 1 or 2 days, I'm not going to pick it back up.
Yes.
So you want to find things that specifically work for yourself or your children and not always follow all the other guidelines that might work for autistic people or other people. The neurodivergent brain might have to go a different way about things.
Yeah, and if I could be a little bit bold and direct, that's the problem with setting up contingent responses where you have to earn something you enjoy. And you just expressed it beautifully. As a matter of fact, Amy Laurent, who's also an OT and a psychologist and one of my longtime colleagues, she and I published an article a few years ago, The Problems with Earning, that the activity in and of itself that supports physical health should be the joyful activity that you get inherent. You know, Billy, you guys are flapping. I can see you. It shouldn't have to be something you got to get through to earn something else. And we have to give a lot more attention to the problems of, you know, setting up those kinds of contingencies from an applied behavior analytic perspective that could be sometimes more damaging than helpful, even though the intention is for them to be helpful. So, yeah.
And that, Barry, I think is the biggest takeaway from this project and this work is, and occupational therapy is the meaning. What is the meaning to that individual, to that person? And I think that that's what, and it is a challenge sometimes to find that. And especially in the world we live in where maybe, you know, the dance classes aren't all inclusive, or, you know, not the coaches aren't all educated yet in the way that they need to be to support kids and people on the spectrum. And so for families and autistic people, for the sustainability of health and well-being, especially physical health, finding something that works for you and starting with small little tweaks in your everyday life. And that can be getting up and down from your chair a couple more times a day. Maybe you put your laundry basket in the other room and you're adding a couple extra steps, or you park in a parking spot, the furthest parking spot at Trader Joe's, and then before you go in, and just those little tweaks. And again, you said it, bringing it to that conscious awareness, is the first step. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway is this: there is so much value in the informal exercise, in demything this idea of it needs to be 45 minutes at the gym, or it needs to be organized soccer, and finding things that are in itself motivating and fun and feel like self-care to that individual, to me is how we promote health and physical health and well-being. And that's, Kara said it best, you said it best. And when you can connect it to an enthusiasm, then it's something that's joyful. And the secondary benefit is the physical health, but you're not there, you know, for the, I'm getting 10,000 steps. And it was actually interesting. Most people didn't necessarily want a trackable device. That wasn't super motivating for people. And so I think that when you find what works for you, you know, you mentioned that family that started hiking, and their vision of possibilities expands. And I think that's what Kara said. You start with just a walk, and who knows what exists when you create that space.
Yes.
Right.
And
I think something you have to do. It's something you get to do.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. And Belden, another way of thinking about what you just said is there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there to support physical health and physical well-being.
Yes.
You know, once again, it's so important for parents to say, with addressing that low-hanging fruit, I am doing something. It isn't all about, you know, activities that represent mountains that need to be climbed. But it's just so important for people to realize there are so many opportunities in everyday routines, and that's something else you both emphasized, the importance of kind of it becoming part of a life routine, what we would call part of an emotional and physiological regulation plan that we all need in our lives right now. So thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. And I know we're going to get a lot of feedback from our listeners, especially from families that really are going to take the information you shared and run with it and think a little bit differently about supporting, you know, physical health and well-being, which is all about supporting mental health and a good quality of life. So, Kara and Belden, thanks so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Yeah, thank you both so much for all your support. This project wouldn't have been possible without both of your expertise and experiences. So
Great.
I loved working with both of you. This was
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you both for your professional and personal insights. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go order some kettlebells.